At this time, on page 1, there is an article about our speaker today, Andrew Alden, who is the cross-country coach at South Carolina. And I've asked him to specifically talk to the senior athlete moving on, and then maybe the freshman and sophomore group and their parents, a little bit about the recruiting process. Now, this banquet is being videoed and subject to some serious editing. So in about 2 or 3 days, you can actually watch every word that Coach Alden says today on video worldwide. If you're leaving here, for China, in 2 days, watch it in China. But at this time, I'd like to introduce the cross-country coach of South Carolina, Andrew Alden, our keynote speaker. Thank you, Coach Alden.
First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I want to thank Billy for inviting me to have the pleasure of speaking with you on this Sunday afternoon. As I look out over this audience, I fondly remember 30-something years ago being a high school senior at awards banquets a lot like this one. And I think back to kind of the point that especially the seniors are. On the one hand, you're top dog in your particular sport, in your particular state or high school or whatever. On the other hand, you're on the verge of being a freshman in college and having to start in some ways all over again. People often ask me why I became a coach. And athletics, my experiences in athletics are a big part of the reason that I became a coach, because athletics in a lot of ways changed my life. My parents were not college educated. My grandparents were not college educated. As a matter of fact, I was the first person in the history of my family to go to college. And athletics was a big part of the reason for that. It opened doors for me academically. It opened doors for me financially. It also exposed me to folks who broadened my horizons and allowed me to dream, to go on to graduates, to get an undergraduate education, to get a graduate education, and to have a 30-year career in Division I college athletics. In talking to Billy about the audience here today, it became very apparent that the audience is really kind of divided up into two halves. The seniors, who have probably decided where they're going to go to school, or at least have narrowed it down to 2 or 3 places that they're probably finalists for their final decision making. And the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors who are kind of at various points in the recruiting process. So I'd kind of like to talk to those two groups kind of almost independently. For the seniors, what I'd like to do is I'd like to offer you some advice based on my 30 years of experience about how to be a successful college freshman. The first piece of advice I would offer to you is to choose your peers carefully. One of the top indicators of how successful you're going to be as a college freshman is how successful academically your college roommate is. So if you choose roommates who are scholastically inclined, who are going to go to the library, who are going to study for exams, you're a lot more likely to be successful academically. If, on the other hand, your roommate is going to a party, you're probably going to give that serious consideration on a Wednesday or a Thursday night. So it's important to choose your roommate carefully. This peer environment issue is a big part of why you might well want to consider being a college athlete. Because in general, college athletes do better than the general student population. And a matter of fact, the sports in this room do significantly better than the general student population. So the peers that you're going to have on your team, your teammates, are going to influence you in a positive way to go to class, to study, to do the things that are going to allow you to be successful and to allow you to graduate. Excuse me. The other thing I would suggest you look at is another thing I would suggest that you consider is showing up in shape. Now, well, that sounds simple, but most of you are going to get preseason workouts because we're limited to the amount of practice that we can have with you during the course of the year. X amount of preseason, X amount in season, and so on. So you're going to have, your coach is going to send you work. For example, if you're in a fall sport, your coach is going to send you a summer workout program. If you don't show up in shape, you're going to be behind. You're going to be playing catch up from then on. You're going to be more susceptible to getting hurt. You're going to have a bigger challenge of making the team and a bigger challenge of being successful as a freshman. Third, I would suggest you get organized. What do I mean by that? Well, we have in our hands in these day and age so many resources to organize ourselves, but we don't necessarily use them. Your college coach is not going to be terribly impressed with you if there are small organizational tasks that he asks you to do, emails to respond to, information that he needs, forms that need to be filled out over the course of the summer, if you're not on top of that kind of stuff. So you need to make sure you're getting those tasks done. Equally, you've got a smartphone. Okay, there's no reason that you shouldn't learn how to use that to the best of your ability. Have an accurate calendar, your academic and athletic and academic things that you've got scheduled. Your phone, it's not just a great place to store the phone numbers and email addresses of your friends. You ought to have your coaches and email address in there. You ought to have your academic support people in there. You ought to have the emails and phone numbers of your professors as you go through each class. So when you need to access somebody and shoot an email to a professor, hey, I'm going to miss this exam, or hey, I'm sick today, what do I do? You can just whip it out, do it, and get it done. Additionally, kind of moving on. Fourth, academics. Majors. You know, that's kind of when people are looking around and thinking about schools, often choosing a major is a big part of why they either select a particular school or, you know, why they want to go to college in the first place. But it's important to remember a couple of things about majors. One is the average incoming freshman changes their major 3 times. This is alarming to most of the parents in this audience, but it's a fact. The typical freshman that enters college as pre-med probably has about a 1 in 10 chance of going on to medical school. Okay, so bear in mind that major selection is important, but there's a lot of variables in it. One of the challenges you're going to face as a student athlete is the concept of satisfactory progress. What is satisfactory progress? Well, that's the idea that the NCAA requires you to be getting a certain amount of hours every year towards your degree. So if you decide to change your degree as a sophomore, you could be a straight A student and make yourself ineligible. So there are issues that are more complex for you as a student athlete than the typical student on campus. Another thing that can happen with majors is folks often, you need to honestly and realistically evaluate your academic strengths and weaknesses. And select a major that's going to play to those strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes people get caught up in, I'm going to get a degree in such and such, either because they see it as the kind of the golden ticket, the opportunity to be very financially successful or whatever, and they stay in that major to the point where they wind up not graduating from school. So you need to have an honest talk with yourself about, hey, I'm a math person. Hey, I'm a more of a liberal arts person. What are my strengths and weaknesses? Because at the end of the day, it's better that you have a degree than a fantasy about the degree that you could have had. First semester. First semester is very important in terms of setting the tone for your entire academic career. At the end of your first year, it's going to be 50% of your grade point average. At the end of 4 years, it's going to be 25% of your grade point average. Why do I mention 2 years? Well, at the end of 2 years, you're probably going to be trying to get into a specific major or a specific degree program, or like the business school or the journalism school or something like that. And those programs are going to have minimum GPA requirements. And if you haven't met that GPA requirement, you're going to have to pick a different major. So it's very important to get off on the right foot first semester. And a big part of that is, one is being serious, but two is if you need help, ask for it. Especially if you're a student athlete, you're going to have access to a lot of resources. So if you're a couple of weeks into the semester and you recognize that this particular subject is going to be challenging for you, you need to reach out for help. You don't need to wait until you've failed the midterm. You need to get on it right away. For stronger students, okay, advanced placement. Okay, probably many of you in this room are taking advanced placement exams or are preparing for advanced placement exams to try and exempt yourself from school. That's great. But one of the things I would suggest is that if you have a score on an advanced placement exam that suggests that you've mastered 50 or 75% of the material, you might be better to take the class and get an easy A as opposed to get in a situation where you're over your head. Because if you think about it, if you're in the middle of the semester and you realize, well, I didn't actually master this 25% of the material, and you've got to go back and learn it just so you can keep up, that may be a little bit more of a challenge that you want to take on. So advanced placement is great, but use it carefully. Parents, chances are your kids aren't going to be homesick. Okay? They're going to be busy. They're going to be student athletes. They're going to be going to practice. They're going to be going to class. They're going to have a social life. They're going to be doing their own laundry for a change, which is probably a good thing. Make sure they know how to do their laundry if they don't know how to do their laundry. But I mention this as a parent because you're going to have a big hole in your heart and a big hole in your social calendar. Your life has revolved around your child's athletic pursuits for many, many years. And while parents, you're going to travel as parents to the college games, matches, whatever the case may be, you're not going to see them quite as much as you did in high school. It's not going to be every Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday and so on. All right? So you need to prepare yourself for that. All right. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit to the underclassmen. Just like assembly, the underclassmen can wake up now. I've talked to the seniors. Let's talk about providing information to college coaches. All right? What I would suggest you do is take the time to work up what I would describe as an info sheet. 1 page. Not 20 pages, not 25 pages, 1 page. All right? And on that page, your basic biographical information, your name, your address, your height and weight if that's relevant in your sport, your phone number, your contact information like your phone number, your email, etc., your year of graduation, which is kind of an important thing. And all the same kind of contact information for your coaches in your sports, especially if you're in multiple sports, your guidance counselor, and so on. You also need an NCAA clearinghouse number. How do you get that? You go to ncaa.org. It'll walk you through the process. You should include your academic information, your SAT, your ACT, your grade point average, your class rank, that kind of stuff. If you're going to have, additionally, you should have your athletic stats, major championships, if there are statistics like times or distances or whatever, that's certainly relevant. But be careful to use accurate information, okay? We all have, in my sports, the challenges would be things like the downwind 100 or the relay split or cross-country courses that we all know are short, okay? Don't feel the need to inflate your accomplishments. Make sure your accomplishments are accurate. You may want to include a photo of yourself, a headshot and or a picture in your uniform. Okay, just makes it a little bit easier to keep track of you. When you read most articles about recruiting, they say don't send video unless it's solicited. I agree with that. Okay, if you're going to send a video, don't send a 3-hour-long game film. Don't send a biographical pic that's like 20 minutes long. The reality is college coaches are not going to look at that, take the time to look at that. It's going to wind up on their desk and never get looked at. So couple of minutes, 5 minutes, highlights, boom, boom, boom. Keep it short, keep it short, keep it snappy. Okay, academics for the underclassmen. Just like in athletics, the numbers matter. And they're going to determine your options in life. So GPA, class rank, SAT, ACT, all these things matter. There are going to be factors in terms that are going to impact your choices, whether or not you're going to be a Division I athlete, a Division II, Division III, and a junior college, whether or not you have the opportunity to go to college at all. So numbers matter. Let's talk about each one of the kind of categories of information. First of all, the SAT and ACT. You got to get it done early, and you got to get it done more than once. And one of the challenges we face, one of the challenges you guys face as high school students, athletes, is you don't have free weekends. You got a baseball game, you got a softball game, you got a volleyball match, you got a track meet, whatever the case may be, free weekends are few and far between. But as a junior, you probably need to take the SAT twice and the ACT twice. That's four Saturdays right there. So if you have an opportunity to take the exam where it doesn't conflict, you need not to pass on it. By the same token, you probably need to sit down, especially if you're a multi-sport athlete, you need to sit down with your coach and you need to say, which game can I miss? Which match can I miss that I can get the test scores in? Because I guarantee you, if you put it off, you're going to wind up suddenly realizing at the end of your junior year, you've either only got it in once or you're going to have to skip something really important to be able to take the SAT or ACT to do what you need to do. If you're good at taking the test, you still need to take it more than once. Okay, because there are going to be lines. lines that are minimum numbers, minimum standards for various schools that you're going to be looking at, and you're going to be want to be on the right side of those lines. So just because you got a good score doesn't mean you should pack it in and go home. If you're not good at it, taking the test early allows you to figure that out so you can go get help. So you can start working on it. Putting off the test will not put you into a better position. All right? If you don't think you're good at the test, sometimes people will kind of keep putting it off. Don't put it off, because you need to figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are and start working on it. Additionally, by putting it off, a couple of things happen. One is that you still got to take it, but two is that if college coaches start calling you and you haven't taken the test, they're going to assume you're not terribly serious about going to college. So you need to make sure that you're getting that in. One tip I would suggest about the ACT and the SAT is if you look at most publications, they'll say this ACT score equates to this SAT score. But the reality is that everybody has different strengths and weaknesses, and you may do significantly better on the SAT or the ACT. That's one of the reasons that it pays to take both tests. So figure out which one you're better at and take advantage of that. Additionally, when you start taking the exam, you want to at least have some kind of tentative idea of where you want to be sending your test scores to, because you're paying. You get to send X amount of copies of your test scores out. So if you've got some schools that you're looking at, you probably want to go ahead and list those and make sure those are on there. But you also want to list the NCAA clearinghouse, because you've got to send your SAT and ACT to the NCAA clearinghouse. It's 4 9s. It's really easy to remember. But anyway, you can look that up before you actually take the test. GPA. Everybody pulls out their transcript and they go, my GPA is X. Well, for NCAA purposes, your GPA is something completely different. It's something called the NCAA Core. And the NCAA Core looks at specific academic courses. And it requires specific academic courses, so you need to make sure you're taking those courses as you work your way through high school so you're eligible in college. But in regard to your GPA on your transcript might be a 2.5. Your NCAA Core GPA might well be a 2.0. It's not uncommon for people's GPA to drop a full half a point when you start looking at NCAA Core, because we're looking strictly at very specific academic courses. So just bear that in mind if you're starting to try to figure out where you fit in eligibility-wise or otherwise. Financial aid and scholarships. Mom and Dad can wake up now. There's what I call the talk. And as a student athlete or as a family of a student athlete, I think it's very important to have the talk. And I'm not talking about the birds and the bees here. What I'm talking about is how much money can your family contribute to, or how much money can or is your family willing to contribute to your education? That number might be whatever it takes. It might be this much. It might be 0. Okay? But you need to know that number as you start heading into the recruiting process. Why is that? Well, because most of you in this room are participating in what we call equivalency sports. You're not in a head count sport. Football and basketball are head count sports. What does that mean? That means if you're on a Division I football team, you're either a full scholarship player or you're a walk-on. But in equivalency sports, you might be on 1 or 2%, you might be on 25%, you might be on 50%, you might be on a full, or you might be on 0. You might be a walk-on there too. But it's a very different situation. So as you enter the recruiting process, you need to know what resources your family has to work with, so that you can make rational decisions about where you're going to visit, what schools you're going to consider, and those kinds of things. I'll give you an example. When you start talking about scholarships in track, numbers are kind of part of the equation. For example, in women's track and cross country, which I participate in, we have 18 scholarships. Well, that sounds like a lot. In a lot of ways, it is a lot. Okay, but how does 18 scholarships work in the real world? Well, 18 scholarships in the real world, you might have 50 or 60 girls on a team. Okay? And 18 scholarships is over 4 years. So a typical team that has 18 scholarships might only have 3 or 4 scholarships to give out in a given year. So 18 suddenly doesn't seem like a very big number if you're in a particular recruiting class or in a particular recruiting situation. Other equivalency sports are similar. You could take a sport like swimming, okay, for example. Math is very similar. 14 scholarships for women, 9.9 scholarships for men. Okay, a lot of kids on swim teams, all right? So statistically, In an equivalency sport, you need to think about the fact that you're probably going to wind up paying for, unless you're a superstar athlete, at least part of your education. And how does that all come together? Well, one of the things you need to think about, obviously, are financial aid and academic scholarships. That's going to take some work on your part. You're going to have to make sure all the paperwork's filled out correctly. You're going to have to make sure you've got all the right information from mom and dad. It's filed with financial aid. You're going to have to fill out academic scholarship paperwork and make sure you're meeting all the deadlines for those kinds of things. If you're planning to be a serious athlete, working during the school year is probably not part of your reality. The reality is the NCAA allows us to practice up to 20 hours a week. So if you're practicing for 20 hours a week, competition, travel, academics, study hall, you've got a lot of what I would describe as mandated or required time. So the chances of being able to hold down a part-time job during the school year probably aren't realistic. So if you're making a financial plan, you probably need to consider that. Visiting. You get 5 official or paid visits, is the way most people think about it. And you can start those when your senior year starts. And biggest thing to remember about that is you got to have a test score to take them. If you don't have a test score, you can't take an official visit. Unofficial visits. The big thing unofficial visits are any visit that you make to a campus or an athletic program that's unpaid. And those are becoming more and more popular as we go in because people want to visit earlier and kind of start the process earlier. But a couple things I would mention about unofficial visits. They aren't unscheduled visits, okay? You can't, realistically, your typical college coach has a full calendar every single day with practice and meetings and travel and conferences and everything else. So you can't honestly show up and just kind of go to the receptionist and go, can I meet with Coach so-and-so today? Realistically, you're probably going to be very disappointed in that experience. But you can call, you can email, you can schedule an appointment for a half an hour or an hour to sit down and talk about a program on a specific day, a couple weeks in advance. All right? So if you're thinking about taking unofficial visits, that's the way they really work. Contacts. I mentioned contacts because that's kind of part of my experience here today, and that is just because a coach, we're limited in the number of times we can speak to a student athlete during the course of the year. So if you're at a volleyball match or a golf tournament and there's a college coach there, just because that coach doesn't speak to you doesn't really mean anything. May not want to use a contact, may not want to do something that puts himself in a different particular recruiting mode. So just because a coach is either cuts off a conversation with you or chooses not to have a conversation with you doesn't really mean anything. Before you're visiting, do your research, okay? What are some of the things that you should be researching? Well, academics, of course. Looking for if you have a particular thing that you want to do, like going to medical school, do they have programs that move you in the right direction for that? Or if you have a particular profession that you want to pursue, do they have a good program in that? Certainly majors is something that's very reasonable to look at. You want to look at the student population academically, all right? Are you Joe or Joan student there? The SAT numbers from the incoming academic numbers for their freshman class. Where do you fit in that? Are you the top, the bottom, the middle? Kind of what's your picture of yourself academically, where you'd like to fit in that? Admissions in general, what's their admissions process? What are their deadlines? Again, what are the numbers like? Athletically, you're going to look at the program as a whole. You're going to look at things like their staff, the success of their coaches. You're going to look at their facilities. You're going to look at their current team. Who's on their team now. Personnel, things like that. Kind of maybe a lot of people like to try and figure out where they might fit in on the team based on the success of various student athletes. You're going to look at some other things that I would describe as maybe a little more intangible. One is geography. Some people want to go really far away to school. Like, I want to get out. I want to go see something different. Or some people are real homebodies. I want to be within a couple hours of home. Or they have like these vague I want to live within 5 or 6 hours or 3 hours or something like that. But they have a geographic reach that they're comfortable with. And that's something that you need to think about. How far do you want to be a car ride away from home? or are you willing to be all the way across the country? Size of school. Hear this a lot. I want to go to a big school. I want to go to a small school. I encourage you very strongly to take some unofficial visits to kind of figure out the big school, small school thing. Because sometimes when you're saying, I want to go to a small school, you walk onto campus and you go, man, this isn't much bigger than my high school. I need something bigger than this. Or you say, I want to go to a big school, and you get on a campus and you're like, man, this is really overwhelming. This is not quite what I pictured it. So unofficial visits can be very helpful in terms of kind of narrowing that part of the process down a little bit. You know, if you're looking all across the country, climate might just definitely be a thing. I want to go somewhere warm. I want to be somewhere warm. I want to be somewhere cold. Okay, if you want to see something a little bit different. When you visit, be prepared. Have a list of questions. Work your way through the questions during the course of the visit. You don't necessarily have to ask all 25 questions of the coach. You could ask some of the kids on the team, some of the academic support staff, some of the professors or major people that you meet with, but have a list of questions. Have some things that you want, at the end of the day, you want to be able to answer. Okay? And walk, you know, one of the big, when you're on campus, walk around. One of the things walk around like a regular student would walk around. Okay? Walk from the dining hall to the dormitory. Walk from the class to the dorm, or the bus, or whatever the case may be. But try and have as close as you can to a normal experience of what it would like to be a student on that campus. Go to class. Okay? Try and get a little bit of an experience, because what you're trying to do during the course of the visiting process is reach a point where you can picture yourself being at that particular school. And walk and being, you know, trying to be as much like a regular student during the course of the visiting process can really help with that. You're trying to build that picture. In closing, I'd just like to kind of make one last comment about the recruiting process. And that is, it can be stressful, all right? Because this is a major life-changing decision, you know, in terms of where you're going to go to college, whether you just be as a student or be as a student athlete. But I think the attitude and the way you approach it can allow you to relax just a little bit more. And what I would suggest, the way I would suggest you look at it is not that there is a right and a wrong choice to be made. It's more of a good, better, best situation. This might be the best situation. This is a really good. It's more of a good, better, best situation. There's not a wrong answer here. Okay. So anyway, that's all I have to share with you this afternoon. I hope I've opened your eyes a little bit to, again, what it takes to be successful in college, and at the same time, what the recruiting process is all about. I want to wish you the best of luck with the rest of your athletic career, which I'm sure is going to be very successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.